"You're not welcome in my VIP room," Ethan Carter said, his voice calm enough to make the silence feel even heavier. Every conversation inside the Crystal Hall restaurant died at once. Crystal glasses stopped halfway to waiting hands. Polished silverware rested untouched on white linen. Even the soft piano drifting from the corner seemed to disappear beneath the weight of those 7 words. Maya Williams stood perfectly still, balancing a serving tray against one hand. The warm aroma of grilled salmon and rosemary lingered in the air, but suddenly the luxurious dining room felt colder than the winter rain pressing against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. More than 100 guests had gathered for Carter Hospitality's annual executive gala, where investors, politicians, and business leaders celebrated what was expected to become the largest expansion deal in the company's history. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across marble floors so polished they reflected every expensive suit and designer gown. Maya had worked dozens of events like this over the past year. She knew how to move without interrupting conversations, how to refill glasses before anyone noticed they were empty, and how to disappear the moment a guest no longer needed her. Tonight had been no different until one accidental moment changed everything. A little girl sitting beside her grandparents had quietly whispered that she was allergic to the sauce placed beside her entree. Maya immediately reached for the plate, intending to replace it before the child took a bite. The movement delayed the service sequence by less than 30 seconds. To Maya, protecting the child mattered more than perfect timing. To Ethan Carter, it was an unforgivable mistake. The young CEO stepped away from the head table with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether every room belonged to him. His tailored navy suit looked flawless beneath the warm lights, and the polished leather shoes echoed sharply across the marble floor as every employee instinctively moved aside. His expression remained composed, but disappointment settled across his face like ice. "Who authorized you to interrupt my guests?" he asked. Maya met his eyes without raising her voice. "The little girl has a severe allergy, sir. I wanted to make sure she stayed safe." Ethan barely glanced toward the child. "That decision wasn't yours to make." Several executives exchanged uneasy looks. A few guests lowered their eyes toward their plates, pretending not to listen. Others watched openly, curiosity replacing conversation. Maya tightened her grip on the tray, refusing to let her hands shake. Years of balancing impossible schedules, double shifts, and caring for her mother had taught her how to remain steady when life became unfair. She simply answered, "I believed it was the right thing to do." Ethan let out a quiet breath that sounded more disappointed than angry. "What you believe is irrelevant while you're wearing that uniform." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Maya noticed a young busboy freeze beside the dessert station. An older hostess looked down, embarrassed for reasons she couldn't explain. Somewhere near the back of the room, a wine glass gently touched the table with a tiny click that echoed through the silence. Ethan straightened his jacket before speaking again. "Leave your apron with the manager. Your shift is over." No one moved. No one spoke. Maya slowly set the untouched plates onto a nearby service cart with the same care she had shown every customer that evening. Her name tag caught the chandelier light for just a second before she unclipped it from her uniform. She looked at the polished badge resting in her palm, smiled almost imperceptibly, then lifted her eyes toward Ethan once more. Her voice remained calm, respectful, and unexpectedly confident. "I hope tomorrow, Mr. Carter, you'll still have the opportunity to call me a waitress." A faint murmur rippled across the dining room. Ethan frowned, unable to understand why someone who had apparently just lost everything could sound so completely at peace. Without another word, Maya turned toward the grand entrance. The heavy glass doors opened as cold rain swept in from Michigan Avenue. She walked into the storm with measured steps, disappearing beneath the city lights. While the golden reflections behind her slowly faded into silence, leaving an entire ballroom wondering why her final sentence sounded less like a farewell and more like a promise. The rain followed Maya Williams all the way to the elevated train platform, turning the city lights into long ribbons of gold across the wet pavement. She stood beneath the shelter without rushing, her folded apron resting neatly inside her canvas tote, as though it were simply another workday ending a little later than expected. Around her, Commuters hurried through the cold evening carrying briefcases, umbrellas, and grocery bags, each absorbed in lives that had no idea hers had just taken a remarkable turn. Her phone vibrated softly. It was not a message asking whether she had lost her job. It was not a friend offering sympathy. It was a calendar reminder she had scheduled 6 months earlier. Final board confirmation. 8:30 tomorrow morning. She looked at the screen for only a second before slipping the phone back into her coat pocket. Across town, inside a quiet rehabilitation center, her mother Evelyn Williams was finishing another round of treatment. Every extra shift Maya had worked, every late night serving tables, every holiday spent carrying trays instead of celebrating had been part of one simple promise she had made 2 years earlier. No matter how difficult life became, her mother would never miss the care she needed because of money. Few people knew that before putting on a waitress uniform, Maya had spent nearly a decade building corporate growth strategies for one of the most respected investment firms in New York. She had graduated near the top of her Master of Business Administration class, earned the trust of senior partners before turning 30, and helped restructure struggling companies that later became industry leaders. When her mother became ill, Maya quietly stepped away from conference rooms, private jets, and executive titles without asking anyone to admire the sacrifice. She never considered honest work beneath her. A uniform could change. Character could not. During the past 18 months, she had accepted temporary consulting assignments under strict confidentiality while working evenings at Crystal Hall Restaurant. The arrangement confused almost everyone who learned about it, but Maya preferred it that way. Serving customers reminded her that every successful company ultimately existed because ordinary people trusted it every single day. She learned more about leadership carrying dinner plates than many executives learned sitting inside luxury boardrooms. She watched managers who inspired loyalty simply by remembering names. She watched wealthy clients treat employees with kindness that required nothing except respect. She also watched others reveal who they truly were the moment they believed no one important was watching. Ethan Carter had unknowingly become one of those observations. The train arrived with a long metallic sigh, and Maya found a quiet seat beside the window. As Chicago drifted past outside, another notification appeared on her phone. This time it came from Jonathan Brooks, managing partner of Horizon Capital. The message contained only one sentence. Everything is finalized. The board voted unanimously. See you at headquarters tomorrow morning. Maya read the words once before closing the screen. There was no celebration, no dramatic smile, no triumphant speech. She simply rested her forehead lightly against the cool glass as neighborhoods rolled by beneath the city lights. Somewhere only a few miles away, executives were still raising glasses inside the gala, convinced tomorrow would belong to the same people who had always held power. None of them realized that while they celebrated the past, the future had already signed its name. Maya closed her eyes for a brief moment and remembered the little girl whose meal she had quietly replaced. Protecting someone had cost her a job, but she would make the same decision again without hesitation. Integrity did not depend on a paycheck. It depended on choosing what was right even when nobody expected it to matter. Morning arrived wrapped in a pale winter sky that reflected against the glass towers of downtown Chicago. Inside Carter Hospitality headquarters, the atmosphere felt nothing like the celebration from the night before. Employees hurried through the marble lobby carrying laptops and steaming cups of coffee, whispering about an unexpected emergency board meeting scheduled before regular business hours. No explanation had been given. The only instruction was simple. Attendance was mandatory for every executive. Ethan Carter stepped out of a black sedan with the same confidence that had carried him through years of uninterrupted success. Security greeted him by name. Assistants rushed to match his pace. The revolving doors opened before he reached them, and the familiar scent of polished oak, fresh coffee, and expensive leather filled the lobby. Everything looked exactly as it had the previous afternoon. That certainty reassured him. As far as Ethan knew, the previous evening had ended perfectly. Investors had applauded his expansion strategy. Reporters had praised his leadership. The company's stock had closed at another record high. Even the small incident involving the waitress had already disappeared from his mind. In his experience, businesses advanced because difficult decisions were made quickly and emotional distractions were left behind. He believed that was what separated leaders from followers. As he crossed the lobby, Employees greeted him politely, but something felt different. Conversations stopped a fraction of a second too early. Several department managers avoided direct eye contact. Two members of the legal team stood near the elevator speaking in unusually quiet voices before suddenly falling silent when Ethan approached. He noticed the change immediately but dismissed it. Rumors always spread before major announcements. He assumed the board intended to reward another successful quarter with an even larger expansion budget. On the 38th floor, the executive conference room overlooked Lake Michigan beneath a blanket of silver clouds. Normally, the room buzzed with confident conversation before meetings began. Today, the polished walnut table remained strangely quiet. Several board members sat reviewing folders that had not been distributed through the usual executive office. Jonathan Brooks, managing partner of Horizon Capital, stood beside the panoramic windows, speaking calmly with the company's chairman. Ethan recognized him immediately. Horizon Capital had quietly accumulated shares over the past several years, but their representatives rarely attended internal meetings. Seeing Jonathan there this early raised an unexpected question. Ethan extended his hand with a professional smile. "Jonathan, I was not expecting to see you this morning." Jonathan returned the handshake with the same measured composure he displayed during every negotiation. Sometimes the most important meetings happen after everyone believes the story has already ended. Ethan laughed politely, assuming it was simply another executive expression. He took his usual seat near the head of the table and opened the agenda packet waiting in front of him. Instead of quarterly forecasts and acquisition updates, the first page displayed a single heading printed in bold letters: Extraordinary Governance Session. He turned the page. The second document outlined a finalized ownership restructuring approved shortly after midnight. Ethan read the opening paragraph twice, convinced he had misunderstood the language. Horizon Capital had completed the purchase of a controlling interest in Carter Hospitality through a series of previously negotiated agreements that had remained confidential until federal filing requirements were complete. His heartbeat remained steady, but the certainty he carried into the building began to shift. He looked around the room, searching for familiar reassurance. None appeared. The chairman quietly adjusted his glasses before standing. Outside, the first rays of sunlight finally broke through the clouds, filling the conference room with warm light that stretched slowly across the polished table. The chairman folded his hands and looked toward the entrance instead of the executives already seated. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "our new chief executive officer has just arrived." Every chair remained occupied, yet the room suddenly felt empty as every pair of eyes turned toward the conference room doors. The quiet click of polished heels echoed across the marble hallway outside before the doors opened slowly. Maya Williams stepped inside wearing a tailored ivory business suit, a charcoal overcoat folded neatly across one arm, and a simple leather portfolio in her hand. Her natural curls were carefully styled, and the confidence in her posture needed no introduction. She looked exactly like someone who belonged in the room, not because of the clothes she wore, but because she carried herself with the calm certainty of a leader who had already made peace with difficult decisions. Ethan Carter stared without saying a word. For one suspended moment, the image before him refused to fit the memory from less than 12 hours earlier. He remembered the navy apron, the silver serving tray, the rain outside the restaurant doors, and one quiet sentence that had seemed impossible at the time. Around the table, several directors exchanged knowing glances. They had met Maya weeks earlier during confidential strategy sessions organized by Horizon Capital. They knew her credentials, her experience, and the years she had spent quietly rebuilding companies that many experts had considered impossible to save. Only Ethan had never been invited into those conversations. Jonathan Brooks stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Good morning, everyone. It is my privilege to introduce the board's unanimous choice to lead Carter Hospitality into its next chapter. Please welcome our new Chief Executive Officer, Maya Williams." No applause came immediately. Instead, silence settled across the room once again, deeper than the silence inside the restaurant the previous evening. Ethan slowly rose from his chair without realizing he had done so. His expression remained controlled, but the certainty that had defined him for years slipped away with every passing second. Maya acknowledged the board with a gracious nod before taking her place at the head of the conference table. It was the very chair Ethan had occupied only moments earlier. She did not rush to sit. Instead, she looked around the room, meeting each executive's eyes one by one, making certain every person felt seen. When her gaze finally reached Ethan, there was no satisfaction, no anger, and no trace of revenge. There was only professionalism. "Thank you for your confidence," she began in a steady voice. "Carter Hospitality has built remarkable brands, talented teams, and loyal customers across this country. My responsibility is not to erase that legacy. It is to strengthen it by making sure every employee, every guest, and every leader is treated with the same level of respect." Several executives straightened in their seats. The words were simple, yet they carried unusual weight. Maya continued, "Great companies do not lose their reputation because of one difficult quarter. They lose it one decision at a time when people begin believing that titles matter more than character." Ethan lowered his eyes toward the folder in front of him. As he adjusted the papers, something slipped from the inside pocket of his suit jacket and landed softly on the polished wood. It was a small rectangular name tag with a silver border. Maya Williams. The waitress badge she had removed the night before reflected the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Ethan looked at it for several long seconds before carefully picking it up. Across the room, no one laughed. No one whispered. The badge suddenly carried more authority than every executive title printed on the organizational chart. Maya finally took her seat and folded her hands on the table. "Now," she said with the same calm confidence that had carried her through every challenge life had placed before her. "Let us begin building a company where no one is ever underestimated because of the uniform they happen to be wearing." No one reached for the coffee that had been placed beside each leather chair. The rich aroma drifted quietly through the conference room, untouched, as Maya Williams opened the portfolio in front of her with calm precision. Every page had already been reviewed before sunrise. Every recommendation had been supported by months of research, interviews, and operational audits that most executives in the room had never realized were taking place. She was not there to celebrate a personal victory. She was there to begin repairing a culture that had slowly forgotten the people who made the business successful every single day. "Before we discuss expansion," Maya said evenly, "we need to discuss trust." The presentation screen behind her came to life, displaying photographs instead of financial charts. Images of hotel housekeepers, restaurant servers, maintenance technicians, front desk associates, delivery drivers, men and women wearing uniforms from every Carter Hospitality property across the country filled the room. Several executives exchanged confused glances. Ethan remained silent, watching the screen with growing curiosity. Maya continued, "These are not stock photographs. These are our employees. Over the past 8 months, I personally visited 31 properties across 12 states under confidential operational reviews. I worked alongside many of these teams without revealing my identity because I wanted to understand what our culture truly feels like when executives are not watching." A quiet murmur spread across the table. One board member slowly removed his glasses. Another leaned closer to the screen. Maya advanced to the next slide. Employee retention statistics appeared beside customer satisfaction scores. Properties where managers treated frontline employees with dignity consistently outperformed locations where leadership relied on fear or intimidation. Revenue growth, guest loyalty, online reviews, and staff retention all followed the same unmistakable pattern. "Respect," Maya said softly, "is not an abstract value. It is measurable. It affects hiring costs, customer loyalty, productivity, and long-term profitability." Jonathan Brooks nodded without speaking. The data confirmed everything Horizon Capital had discovered before approving the acquisition. Maya clicked to another slide. Anonymous employee survey responses appeared across the screen. One sentence stood out above the others. "I love serving our guests. I just wish someone remembered that I am a person too." The room fell silent again. Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before looking back toward the presentation. The sentence lingered in his mind with uncomfortable familiarity. Maya closed the presentation remote and folded her hands. "Yesterday evening, I witnessed something that reminded me why this work matters," she said carefully, choosing every word with intention. "One decision can influence an entire room. People notice how leaders respond under pressure. They remember whether dignity was protected or ignored. She did not mention names. She did not describe the restaurant. She did not need to. Ethan understood immediately. For the first time since entering the meeting, he felt the weight of his own actions without anyone accusing him. The memory returned with remarkable clarity. The frightened little girl. The delayed service. The quiet confidence in Maya's voice. The expression on the faces of employees who had watched everything unfold without saying a word. He realized that what he had considered efficient leadership had looked very different through the eyes of everyone else in the room. Maya turned one final page inside her portfolio. Effective immediately, she announced. Every executive, including myself, will spend one full shift each quarter working alongside frontline employees across our hotels and restaurants. Not as observers, as teammates. We cannot lead people whose daily reality we no longer understand. Several executives looked surprised. Others slowly smiled in agreement. Ethan remained completely still. The silver name tag rested beside his notebook where he had placed it minutes earlier. His fingers brushed against its smooth edges almost unconsciously. The small piece of metal felt strangely heavy now, not because of what it represented yesterday, but because of everything he had failed to see until this morning. The meeting adjourned without the usual burst of conversation that normally followed a major corporate announcement. Executives gathered their folders quietly, their polished shoes making soft echoes across the marble floor before disappearing into the hallway one by one. The conference room gradually emptied until only the gentle hum of the city's heating system remained beneath the morning silence. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan shimmered beneath pale winter sunlight, its calm surface reflecting the skyline like brushed silver. Maya Williams remained seated for a few moments after everyone else had left. She closed her portfolio carefully, aligning every document with the same attention she had once given to arranging dinner plates before serving a table. Titles had changed overnight, but discipline had not. She walked toward the windows and rested one hand lightly against the cool glass. 38 floors below, people hurried along sidewalks wrapped in heavy coats, carrying coffee cups and briefcases, each following routines that seemed ordinary until life quietly decided otherwise. She remembered standing on a train platform only hours earlier with rain soaking through her coat while wondering whether her mother had slept comfortably after another exhausting treatment. Success had never erased worry. It had only changed the kind of responsibility she carried. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. Jonathan Brooks stepped inside, without speaking immediately. He carried 2 paper coffee cups from the lobby cafe. He placed one on the conference table before walking beside Maya toward the window. "Quite a morning," he said with a quiet smile. Maya nodded. "The difficult part starts now." Jonathan looked at her thoughtfully. Most people would spend a day enjoying the moment. Maya watched sunlight drift slowly across the frozen lake. "If this position only changes my office, then nothing important has changed." Jonathan understood exactly what she meant. During months of confidential meetings, she had spoken less about profit margins than about trust, opportunity, and dignity. Horizon Capital had not selected her because she could read financial reports better than anyone else, although she certainly could. They chose her because she understood that every balance sheet ultimately reflected human decisions. After a long silence, Jonathan asked, "Do you regret working in the restaurant?" Maya answered almost immediately. Not for 1 second. She smiled softly before continuing. "Some of the most valuable lessons about leadership are never taught inside business schools. They are learned while serving people who believe you are invisible." The words settled quietly between them. Jonathan took a slow sip of coffee before leaving her alone with the city once again. Across the hallway, Ethan Carter remained inside his former office, standing beside the large walnut desk where he had signed countless contracts over the years. The room looked exactly as it had the day before, yet somehow it no longer felt familiar. Family photographs still rested on the bookshelf. Awards still reflected the morning light. The framed newspaper headlines celebrating his appointment as chief executive officer still hung beside the window. Nothing had moved except his understanding of himself. His eyes drifted toward the silver name tag resting in his hand. He turned it over slowly with his thumb, tracing the engraved letters one final time. Maya Williams. Yesterday, he had seen only a uniform. Today he could no longer ignore the person who had worn it. Outside his office window, sunlight gradually pushed away the last gray clouds lingering above the city. The bright reflection stretched across the neighboring glass buildings until the entire skyline seemed warmer than it had only an hour earlier. Ethan stood quietly, listening to the distant sounds of employees beginning another ordinary workday, realizing that true authority had never belonged to the loudest voice in the room. It belonged to the person who could make others feel that they mattered. The afternoon sun settled gently across the headquarters, filling the executive floor with warm light that softened the sharp lines of polished marble and glass. For the first time in years, the offices felt quieter, not because there was less work to do, but because everyone seemed to be thinking more carefully before speaking. Maya Williams had spent the rest of the morning meeting department directors one by one, asking questions far more often than giving orders. She wanted to understand every challenge before making a single major decision. Shortly after lunch, her assistant knocked lightly on the open office door. "Mr. Carter is here," she said. "He asked whether you have a few minutes." Maya looked up from the employee engagement reports spread neatly across her desk. "Please send him in." Ethan Carter entered without the confidence that had once announced his arrival before he spoke. His jacket remained perfectly pressed, but his expression had changed. The certainty that had once defined him had been replaced by quiet reflection. He carried a small envelope in one hand. After the door closed behind him, neither of them spoke immediately. The city stretched beyond the windows behind Maya, alive with afternoon traffic and patches of winter sunlight reflecting from nearby buildings. Ethan finally stepped closer to the desk and carefully placed the envelope in front of her. Inside rested the silver name tag she had removed from her apron the previous evening. "I believe this belongs to you," he said softly. Maya looked down at the familiar badge before lifting her eyes toward him. "Thank you." Ethan nodded once, but did not leave. He took a slow breath as though choosing words that mattered more than any presentation he had ever delivered. "Last night I convinced myself I was protecting standards. This morning I realized I was protecting my own pride." The honesty in his voice surprised even him. Maya listened without interrupting. She had learned long ago that genuine understanding often arrived only after silence had done its work. Ethan continued, "I spent years believing leadership meant always being right, always appearing strong, always making quick decisions. Somewhere along the way I stopped seeing people and started seeing positions." His eyes briefly settled on the name tag resting between them. "Yesterday, I did not see Maya Williams. I only saw a waitress standing where I thought she did not belong." The room remained still except for the distant sound of traffic drifting faintly through the insulated glass. Maya folded her hands calmly. "Many people make that mistake," she answered. "The important question is whether they are willing to learn from it." Ethan gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I am trying." He reached into his portfolio and removed a handwritten letter. "I prepared my resignation before coming here. I thought it was the only responsible thing to do." Maya accepted the envelope but did not open it. Instead, she placed it gently beside the employee reports. "Why did you decide to resign?" she asked. Ethan looked toward the skyline before answering. "Because I failed the people who trusted my leadership." Maya remained thoughtful for several seconds. "Resigning is sometimes the easiest response to failure," she said quietly. "Growing beyond it is much harder." Ethan looked back at her, uncertain where the conversation was leading. Maya stood and walked toward the window overlooking Chicago. The sunlight reflected across the glass, casting both of their reflections side by side against the skyline. Without turning around, she spoke again. "A company does not become stronger because one leader falls. It becomes stronger when its leaders choose to become better than they were yesterday." Ethan stood silently, absorbing every word. For the first time in many years, he realized that respect could never be demanded by a title. It could only be earned through humility, accountability, and the courage to change. The following Monday began with a different rhythm inside Carter Hospitality. Instead of gathering exclusively in executive offices, senior leaders spread across hotels and restaurants throughout the city, introducing themselves to employees they had never previously taken time to know. The new leadership initiative had officially begun, and Maya Williams insisted on participating before asking anyone else to do the same. She arrived at the flagship restaurant just before the breakfast rush wearing a simple employee uniform identical to the one she had worn only days earlier. The only difference was that this time everyone knew who she was. Some employees smiled nervously, unsure whether to treat her like the chief executive officer or like another teammate preparing tables before guests arrived. Maya solved the uncertainty herself. She picked up a stack of menus, greeted every employee by name after reading their badges carefully, and quietly joined the morning preparation without asking for special treatment. Across the dining room, Ethan Carter entered a few minutes later wearing the same uniform issued to every new trainee. There was no reserved entrance, no executive escort, and no private office waiting behind the kitchen doors. Several employees looked at him with visible surprise. Some remembered the gala only a few nights earlier. Others had already heard the story spreading throughout the company. Ethan noticed the expressions but did not attempt to explain himself. Instead, he walked directly toward the service station where an experienced supervisor named Linda handed him a notepad and smiled kindly. "Today we start with learning," she said. "Every guest deserves your full attention." Ethan accepted the notepad with quiet appreciation. Throughout the morning, he refilled coffee cups, carried breakfast plates, cleaned tables, and greeted families arriving from nearby hotels. More than once he caught himself preparing to hurry past employees focused on routine tasks, only to stop and ask whether they needed help. The smallest conversations taught him more than years of reviewing performance reports. A dishwasher proudly explained how the kitchen stayed organized during busy weekends. A hostess described the importance of remembering returning guests by name. A young server shared how one encouraging manager had inspired her to finish college while continuing to work evenings. Every story carried the same lesson. People gave their best when they believed someone genuinely valued them. Near the end of the lunch shift, a little girl entered the restaurant holding her grandmother's hand. Ethan immediately recognized her. She was the same child whose food allergy had changed everything only days before. Before anyone else noticed, Maya quietly approached the family, confirmed the allergy information with the kitchen, and personally ensured the meal was prepared safely. The grandmother smiled with visible gratitude. "Thank you for remembering," she said warmly. Maya simply replied, "People should never have to remind us to care." Ethan stood several feet away, listening without interrupting. He realized that the decision he had criticized had never delayed excellent service. It had defined it. After the final guests departed, Maya gathered the restaurant team for a brief conversation. She looked around the room at cooks, hosts, servers, dishwashers, supervisors, and managers standing side by side in the quiet dining room, where sunlight now streamed gently through the windows. "This company will always pursue excellence," she said. "But excellence begins with how we treat one another long before guests ever walk through these doors." Every employee applauded softly, not because they had been instructed to, but because they recognized sincerity when they heard it. Ethan joined them without hesitation. For the first time in many years, he understood that leadership was never about standing above everyone else. It was about standing beside them when it mattered most. 6 months later, the first light of autumn stretched across downtown Chicago, bathing the glass towers in a warm golden glow that reflected over the quiet streets below. Carter Hospitality had become a different company, not because every challenge had disappeared, but because the people inside its buildings had begun treating one another differently. Employee turnover had dropped to its lowest level in more than a decade. Guest satisfaction scores had reached record highs. Applications from talented professionals across the country continued arriving every week, many mentioning the company's reputation for valuing people before positions. None of those achievements had been announced with dramatic speeches. They had grown quietly from thousands of ordinary decisions made every single day. Inside the flagship restaurant, new employee orientation had become a monthly tradition. Instead of beginning with financial presentations, every class started in the dining room before opening hours. Fresh coffee filled the air. Morning sunlight reflected across polished tables. New team members stood together wearing freshly pressed uniforms, uncertain about what to expect from their first day. The restaurant doors remained closed to guests while one familiar figure carried a tray of warm pastries toward the group. It was Ethan Carter. He smiled as he welcomed each new employee personally, offering coffee, breakfast, and a handshake before introducing himself simply as Ethan. Most of the new hires had no idea he had once occupied the highest office in the company. To them, he was the director leading the leadership development. program that every manager now completed before supervising a single employee. He listened carefully as each person shared their story, remembering names just as Maya had taught him. Nearby, Linda watched with quiet pride. She remembered the man who once believed leadership depended on authority alone. The difference before her could not have been created by policy manuals or executive seminars. It had been created by humility. Moments later, Maya Williams entered the restaurant through the front doors without any announcement. She wore a navy business suit, but before greeting the executives waiting for a scheduled meeting upstairs, she paused to welcome the newest employees herself. One young server nervously admitted that this was his first restaurant job. Maya smiled warmly. "Every expert starts with a first day," she said. "Never let a uniform define what you are capable of becoming." The young man smiled with visible relief. Ethan looked across the room toward Maya, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. They exchanged only a quiet nod that carried more meaning than words ever could. There was no resentment left between them, only mutual respect built through honesty, accountability, and the willingness to grow. As Maya turned toward the elevators, she noticed a familiar silver name tag displayed inside a small glass frame mounted near the employee entrance. Beneath it rested a simple plaque. Maya Williams, first uniform, a reminder that every role deserves dignity. Employees passed the display every morning before beginning work, and many paused for just a second before continuing their day. It reminded them that greatness could begin anywhere and that kindness was never a sign of weakness. Outside, a gentle breeze carried golden leaves across the sidewalk while sunlight spilled through the restaurant windows onto the polished floor. Guests soon filled the dining room with quiet conversations and warm laughter. Coffee cups clinked softly against saucers. Fresh bread emerged from the kitchen. Life moved forward with its ordinary rhythm, yet something extraordinary had taken root beneath those ordinary moments. No title had the power to measure a person's worth. No uniform could hide true character forever. And in the peaceful silence between one sunrise and the next, the strongest legacy any leader could leave behind was not authority, but the simple decision to make every person feel seen.